Okay, well, we are live. I I used to do this more often. And when I did it, I would actually schedule that ahead of time so people kind of knew when to tune in. So right now, probably no one here. I'm going to just, oh, send this around a little bit on the Twitter and see if anyone comes on, and then I'll say what I want to say and then get ready to turn in for the night. But we'll share this around, see if anyone else is up. If you're up and you want to say something in the comments to let me know you are listening, I'm not just talking into the void by myself. I'll probably make this a an episode in the future. I've been thinking about doing this more lately. Instead of when I do solo episodes, I want to record something. Maybe just make it a live stream too, so people can listen in. Good evening. Damn it, Jeremy. It's a funny name. So I don't know. I had a lot I wanted to talk about, and one of the I don't know. I guess it's a downside, right? Like, there's always trade offs, right? Pros and cons, and although there's a lot of upsides to being with the Libertarian Christian Institute now and having help and a team behind the production of the podcast and everything like that, the downside is I kind of miss being able to live react to things. And anything that I record, I have to wait anywhere from a week to 3 weeks or more for before that'll actually come out. And by then, what I wanted to talk about might not be relevant anymore. So, uh, but we're here now, so I'll stop beating around the bush. So this was an interesting past 24 hours on Twitter. I had a tweet from like over no, not sorry, not quite a year ago. It was like the end of November or the beginning of December that I made a tweet in 2022 about Mormonism, and it was to the effect of like most people who I've encountered who have done a deep dive into the history of Mormonism and the history of Joseph Smith and the founding and all that uh, are no longer Mormons, if they were. So, um, and I mean, maybe I was a little, I don't know, hyperbolic or something, but that tweet didn't really get a lot of. I mean, it got a little bit of reaction, I guess, a year ago, and then for some reason, yesterday, some Mormon account, I guess, saw it and shared it, and then suddenly I was just getting swarmed by, I mean, dozens and dozens of different angry Mormons coming after me and taking shots and saying things. Um, I mean, not all of them. Some of them were nice and gracious and whatnot, and just wanting to have a conversation. And others were uh, behaving in a way that was actually kind of funny. It was like they were throwing insults my way, not even good ones, right? Like, it's one thing when you encounter vile people on the internet and they swear at you, or if they're like on the left, they'll call you a Nazi or a fascist or something, horrendous like that, or a bigot. And then if you talk to, or that's kind of what you usually interact. But when you're getting attacked by like vicious, angry Mormons, it's like you're getting these weird, like PG rated insults. It's like, oh, you nerd, or you're such a dork, or things like that. Uh, and then just like antagonistic behavior that's just kind of weird for people who are claiming to be followers of Christ. And I called a couple people out on that. I was like, all right, like, my claim is that Mormons, I don't consider the Mormon religion to be under the umbrella of Christianity, but if you're going to claim that it is, and then act in a very unchrist-like fashion, that doesn't exactly help your argument with what I was trying to say. Um, And so the response that I got from that was a lot of people saying, "Oh, well, Jesus wasn't always nice. Like, look at all the names he called the Pharisees, and he flipped tables, and he fashioned whips, and all this." And so I was like, "Okay, yeah, that's true." The questions I would ask to that would be, is that the majority of what Jesus did when he encountered criticism or encountered people who you know he was in some kind of dialogue with, and who and when did Jesus reserve his sort of like more righteous anger or his righteous insults or zingers for? Because I think that that's an important thing to talk about. And so I think some people use those passages as a justification to be like, well, I can just be a unhinged jerk, right? Now, listen, I mean, let me a little caveat. If you're not a Christian, then I'm really not going to care what you do, and hold you to that standard, right? Like if a bunch of atheists, let's say I said something about atheism, and a bunch of atheists came out of the woodworks and started, you know, uh, trying to make fun of me on Twitter or throw insults and swears my way, I to kind of ignore it and move on. That's Twitter. Again, it's when people claim to be Christian and they're doing it that I kind of go, well, hold on. If you're going to claim to be under, we're on the same team here, then I'm going to hold you to the standard that I think, that I hold myself to, imperfectly, but I believe I do my best to do so. I'd hold brothers and sisters in Christ to this standard. It's like, and the response of, well, Christ was, used names to, against the Pharisees, called them a pit of vipers or snakes, or called people Satan, and flipped tables, and fashioned whips in the cleansing of the temple. It's like, well, that, to use those as justifications to just kind of be a jerk whenever someone says something you don't like, uh, seems to me to be kind of a poor application of theology and understanding of these passages. So let me go into more detail. The pattern I think that we see here when Jesus is being, kind of fueled by that kind of righteous anger, is that it is reserved, whether it's towards the Pharisees or it's the cleansing of the temple, it's kind of in the same pattern. It is reserved for those who are abusing authority, and especially abusing religious authority, or who are acting with religious authority in a way that is especially hypocritical. And so that is what irks the anger of Jesus the most. Is going after those who are in top position, not anyone who is a believer or who was Jewish, who maybe had a position that he disagreed with. No, it was people in high positions of authority who either, who made, decisions and ruled on things in a way that impacted the masses in terms of what they believed and how they were told to practice their religion and how they were told to, enforced to operate in the temple. The Pharisees were, they're sort of the model of those who care very much about the outward appearance of righteousness, who wear the law on their robes but don't have the law in their hearts, don't understand the heart of the law. And they only care about outward appearance and outward righteousness and outward adherence to these laws, and really adding to these laws all these extra complicated rules to try to make sure they were obeying them perfectly, adding a lot of extra biblical, rules and regulations to the Sabbath and whatnot, and holding people to these and kind of acting superior because they were the ones who adhered to the law most correctly. And so, that deserves to be called out, because that's leading people in a direction that is the opposite of what, godly leaders should be leading their flock in. And so, Jesus was calling that out, rightfully so. This is a lot of what Jesus was coming to correct. And then in the cleansing of the temple, right, we have an instance where Jesus is, and I'll share a good link here, probably in the show notes for this. The reason why Jesus did what he did in the money temple, right? In the temple, was because the people would come to Jerusalem to worship God in the temple in accordance to the Jewish law, and they needed kosher animals to do so. Well, they can't exactly just, always, depending on how far away they are, just bring their animals and bring their sacrifices with them because they're traveling long distances. So they would buy the animals on arrival. And so, then there were people that would help them, they'd have to pay a fee to get their money changed to the right currency so that they could pay the merchants and stuff for the animals and stuff so that they could do the sacrifices for their worship. So there was nothing wrong in theory with like the merchants and the money changers. They were providing a service that seems to be somewhat legitimate in theory. The issue was with how they were doing it. One, they had set up inside the court of the Gentiles. And so, they are setting up, and Jesus is in the house of prayer that's set up for the nations. And so that's why Jesus is upset, because they have turned the house of prayer for the nations into a house of trade. And so this is really an act of like mockery, of sort of like spitting in the face of God in the temple of his of worship, making it impossible for people to worship there. They could hardly get into the building and use the building, for the temple room for what it was supposed to be used for because of all the commercial activity that was going on. And then, there's also, this is in the context of why Jesus cursed the fig tree. He's cleansing the temple because there is empty, again, same reason he's criticizing the Pharisees, there's empty religious activity. It is people who are engaged in only the letter of the law, adhering to it, but not actually letting the law be in their hearts, not trying to be transformed and to use these things as acts of worship. Rather, they're checking boxes, right? And so people are self-centered, they're hostile to God, their worship is shallow, and they are making a mockery of God's temple. And so that is why Jesus does what he does. And so yes, there are times, and Jesus displays this, right? There are times for like righteous anger, and there's times to call people out on their hypocrisy, and that's especially true for leaders, and even more so for religious leaders. So, listen, people who follow me on Twitter and listen to my podcast know that I'm not exactly close-lipped when it comes to holding people accountable. I have zero issue with that. If I've defended, for example, the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire when they engage in even more than what I will do in terms of, throwing insults and crafting memes and messages that are mocking political officials and warmongers and things like that. And even though it's like I won't always go that far myself, I defend them in a lot of what they do, and have once in a while criticize certain things they say that I think go too far. But for the most part, I'd say I fall on the side of, if we're going to hold the political establishment to count for their hypocrisy and for their abuse of power, sometimes a way to do that in a way that really cuts through and makes the message clear, it's like if you have maybe it's a false dichotomy, but if you have a choice between like, well, we think that this politician is a good person and we just disagree on policy when it comes to, what they have done has contributed to, hundreds of thousands of people starving to death in the Middle East. It's like, yeah, maybe if again, if we lived in a country where our government was only guilty of taxing people too much, right, or having a social welfare system or something, that might be the place to kind of be a little bit more, kind of in that civil tone, approaching your disagreements. But when you're kind of like going to the public sphere to make a message about politicians and government leaders being complicit in the deaths of thousands and hundreds of thousands of innocent people, both domestically and across the globe, or even not just deaths, but just like oppression. I mean, we have the world's largest prison population. We restrict people's natural rights. So, like, in instances like that. Now, personally, what I would hold Christians to would be a little bit different than what I'd hold like, libertarian activists in general, or the Libertarian Party of New Hampshire, like I cited earlier. But even myself, I tend to be a little bit more aggressive, right? I will not really use profanities, but I will, in very strong language, call these people warmongers, call them hypocrites, call them murderers, because I think that they're complicit in murder. I might even go as far as Jesus called people Satan, you know what I mean? Like, are worshipers or lovers of Satan, lovers of evil. I could see myself saying similar things about, certain people in positions of power in the United States and across the globe, and I think that is appropriate. If there were religious leaders who are complicit in doing this, I might tactfully consider, if it's really egregious, taking a similar approach as well. But do I think that Christians should, in general, when we're engaging in disagreements over theology or disagreements over, other matters of politics that maybe don't have stakes to that degree, should we be just throwing insults at each other and making, acting, whether it's like the really nasty stuff that you can see on Twitter, or like this, again, what happened with me, which was really just was funny. It was like a bunch of kindergartners trying to like am I back in kindergarten in the sandbox? People are calling me a mini poo poo head or something like that. Like that was the level of insults. Or calling me a nerd or something. I was like, okay, like again, and it's like, and especially to touch back on again, this context as being the Mormons coming after me. Again, if you're trying to convince, if the argument is I don't think that your religion fits in the umbrella of Christianity, then you act in a very un-Christ-like fashion as a response to that, I think that's especially, it's not going to do much to bolster your counter argument to what I said. Now, so the last thing I'll touch on then is the Mormonism topic, and I don't know. I thought about not addressing this, but it was viral enough. I had to mute the tweets because it was just getting too much. What I did make a comment. I basically said, listen, Mormonism isn't really my focus. I was like, I said this a year ago, and I was maybe a little bit harsh in what I said. Like, I could have found a more gracious way to say it, and I'll own that. And in general, I focus, a lot more on the state and religious hypocrisy than I care to really focus on Mormonism at this point in time. And a lot of Mormons are probably more, aligned with me on those goals than we are divided. So in many ways, they're allies on those fronts. And so I wouldn't want to alienate them. And so, if there are Mormons who listen to my podcast or follow me on Twitter, it's like, I don't view you as the enemy. But if the question does come to, do I consider us followers of the same religion? I mean, I don't know. I find that a difficult question to answer. We actually just had a class on Mormonism at our church, and it's something that I have studied in the past as well. And I don't know. I mean, I believe the gospel message is an essential aspect of that is the idea of the Trinity. I believe an essential aspect of that is salvation by faith alone, and that salvation is aimed towards being reconciled with God. And there's just a lot of Mormon beliefs that I think go beyond beyond those things, or distort those truths, and I find that to be tough to reconcile with. The Mormon belief is that God was once like us, and we will one day be like him. And again, I find that hard to reconcile with scripture. I find that on an epistemological level, am I saying that right? Epistemology, epistemological. I don't know. Someone can fact check me on that. If that's I find on the if we're trying to compare the epistemology, I'll put it that way, how we judge what is true or reasonably true between uh, Christianity and Mormonism and the claims they make. Right? The Christians claim the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the death and resurrection of Jesus as being things that, although require some measure of faith to believe, that there is also a fair amount of historical, archaeological, and logical data and evidence and arguments that collaborate with this, and so it's a reasonable faith. I don't see that on display with the foundations of the Mormon religion and their claims of the Bible being corrupted and the true religion being lost, of Jesus coming to America, of Joseph Smith getting the golden tablets, and then his witnesses said that there's conflicting stories from the witnesses in terms of if they saw the tablets or not physically, and then the tablets went up to the angels took the tablets away, and the Israelites, tribes from Israel, migrated to America, and it's just I don't see what apologists and Old and New Testament scholars who argue for uh, the veracity and historical reliability of the Old and New Testament scriptures. They just use a different method of epistemology and apologetics, using historical science and things like that to argue for the trustworthiness of those documents and those scriptures, and the claims as well. If we're talking about like the claims of the Bible, of the death and resurrection of Jesus, even the Israel leaving Egypt and going to the Promised Land, different things. I'm not saying it's perfect. I'm not saying it requires zero leap of faith, but it's a reasonable faith. It's a faith based on claims that are backed by enough evidence that they don't just seem like they were fabricated completely out of nowhere. There's also an historical element here where it's like, the Jewish religion came out of a region that it didn't make sense to come out of, right? Like you have a bunch of polytheistic religions, and then this monotheistic religion pops out of it and rejects all that. And like, okay, that's, it's different, right? That isn't something that if someone wanted to make a new religion, making something that's completely different and that doesn't really appeal to people's sensibilities and stuff at the time, I think says something. Same with the New Testament. If someone wanted to fake a resurrection to justify to be like, oh, this was the Messiah and things like that. Like, I don't know, like the claims they made and then were willing to die for are beliefs and claims that the Jews of then and the Jews of today don't believe, because they say, well, it's just so new and different. It's not what we expected. It's not what we were looking for. It doesn't match up. So it's like it subverted their expectations. Like if you were trying to fool a lot of people and get as many Jewish people as possible to buy onto that, they didn't exactly do a great job of it. But when you look at the historical context of the founding of Mormonism, it seems more to me that it is kind of affirming what people were looking for, what people were speculating about, people were writing about at the time. So I don't know. Those are my thoughts. I don't really want to, again, spend too much time debating Mormonism with people. If you're a Mormon, you listen to my show, I hope you enjoy it. But just know that I have questions about your religious claims that I have not heard good answers for, and I've looked into it, and This doesn't mean I view you as an enemy. And uh, I do hope and pray that if you do view, Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior, that, you read the words of Jesus in the New Testament, which I think there's good reason to believe that the words there have not been corrupted or lost or changed in any way, uh, and compare that to what the claims of the Mormon religion are, and see if they, if you find any conflict there, because I think you might. And I say this with love and respect. I hope that comes through. But yeah, for the Mormons who were coming after me and throwing those insults again, I don't think you can use the life of Jesus as a, which is funny when if the claim is the Bible's lost its veracity and things have been changed and whatnot, and then you're going to use the Bible to justify your behavior, and it doesn't really make sense the way you're using it. Again, it doesn't really bode well for constructing a coherent argument, I think. And I find it a little bit ironic. That's all. So I don't know. I just kind of felt like getting those things off my chest, and I might make this a episode down the road, because I think some of it's interesting. Look at the comments. I see Chase has left a couple different comments. Yes, I have. He asked if I've seen Apologia Studios and their on the street discussions with Mormons. Yeah, I've watched a lot of those in the past. I do like Apologia Studios. I'm a big fan of Jeff Durbin and James White. I know they're a bit more on the theonomist side of the political discussion, and I obviously disagree, although I find that there are areas of agreement between theonomists like them and libertarian anarchists like myself. They were very good on the COVID lockdowns. They're very good on calling out state actors when they're acting like thugs and not actually holding to the prescribed role of civil governance that the Bible lays out for them. And I appreciate that about them. And I am of the Reformed persuasion, which Jeff and James and those in Apologia are as well. And so there's a lot of, a lot in theology and in biblical interpretation that we do agree on. I hope as my podcast grows in reach, I'd love to have a conversation with them someday, because I think, I do have disagreements with the theonomist view of government. I find it weird. I don't know. This goes into also the whole covenant thing, and I've been talking a lot about covenant theology lately, and how that pertains to Zionism and dispensationalism and things like that. I actually have an episode. I think let's see, the episode coming out this week as I'm live streaming this is the audio for the interview I did with Scott Horton, and then next week will be an episode on covenant theology, and that's a topic I'm especially interested in talking about more. And also talking more about dispensationalist theology and Zionism and things like that, just with current events going on with Israel and whatnot. I find that the theonomist view gets confusing, not only because I think they misunderstand the role of civil governance to some degree, although there's definitely parts we agree on there as well, but then a lot of the theonomists will argue for this kind of like one covenant view, which I find weird from the Reformed perspective, because I think the Reformed perspective would have to hold to the fact that it's the Mosaic covenant has ended, and that it's not just one. What I've heard argued from the theonomist perspective is that it is we just have one covenant from start to now and into the future until Christ returns, and that's just not how I understand covenant theology. I think that the Bible itself speaks of that there will be a new covenant, right? This is what is spoken about in Jeremiah. This is what's alluded to in Ezekiel, and the way that I to try to summarize it precisely, the covenant God made with Abraham, which was really was foreshadowed at the beginning of Genesis and all that, even back in the after the fall in the garden. It says that there'll be an offspring that'll crush the snake of the serpent, one of Eve's offspring. And so then you fast forward to Abraham, and the covenant that God makes with Abraham is still a future pointing to Christ. So the true inheritor, the true offspring, right, of the Abrahamic covenant is Christ, is Jesus, right? He's of the Davidic line, ancestor of Abraham, descendant of Abraham. So he is the one who has fulfilled that covenant. The new covenant is in Christ, right? And we become co-inheritors with him. The Mosaic covenant was just a this eschatological intrusion that came in to pave the way for everything I just described to happen, to create the nation state of Israel, to accomplish a lot of different things. I think it accomplished the setting the stage for the eventual coming king and the one true kingdom. So it foreshadows that, but it pales in comparison. And it also shows the failures of the state. It shows the failures of even if God tries to make a kingdom of man and make it good, that it'll ultimately fail. And so I know that's a future episode coming up, and it's a topic that I will be talking about more and more as we continue, and it's very relevant with what's going on today in Israel and Gaza. And so, but yeah, it's something that I find weird. Theonomists are mostly of the Reformed bend, and I find it weird that they hold this one covenant view. And so, yeah, theonomy, again, it's like theonomists are probably a little bit higher in my list of interests than Mormonism, but still, it's like we're brothers, and it's not as a lot of theonomists are good on a lot of things. They're good on calling out the state on local tyranny. A lot of theonomists are really good at calling out the state on foreign wars and tyranny abroad and opposing imperialism. So although there's disagreements to be had and discussions that I think would be valuable, we could do a lot worse than if there were a lot of Christians who were going in that direction. Although I do fear the problem with theonomy is that a lot of theonomists will understand the problem of blowback from American foreign policy, but then don't understand blowback on the cultural level when you engage in, Christian theocracy from the level of the state. So, I read a few more comments here before I go. Joseph Smith was a false prophet. Yeah, I just don't find anything about what Joseph Smith did to be impressive. It comes across to me as incredibly confabulatory, all the claims that he made. Most definitely, they're more fundamentalist. I agree on their personal principles, but not with their politics. I would agree with that as well. All right. Well, I think that's all I got for you guys. So I am going to sign off here. I hope that this was enjoyable. But this will probably come out as an audio episode sometime in the future. And I'll probably be doing more of these here and there. So keep on the lookout for that. Good talking with y'all, and enjoy the rest of your night.